Well, hello everybody. This is Dr. Novak. In the last session I had, I talked about canister filters. I talked about how O-rings are used, how manufacturers design them, and to find a good canister filter that is not going to leak on your main O-ring or your O-rings that parts fit into, what to look for. You want to look for ones that can press O-rings. You want to see when parts go together that they're tapered. You have a male, female, tapered. They go into a taper and they lock in there and they lock that O-ring in. That's what you want to look at. Anything that, like this head, anything that's used that just sits in there like this does and just slides down in there, that's a bad design. You're going to look for a world of hurt. That's all you're going to look for. But that's the way manufacturers make them. And I've heard lots of complaints about canister filters leaking because of that. Well, another thing that canister filters wind up leaking that people just, I don't know why they refuse to do it, is at your connection. Now, a lot of manufacturers will have a tapered connection, like here on this Hamm, for example, and the hose will go onto it and it'll have a locking nut. So when you put a hose onto one of these, you press it all the way down and it'll have a locking nut. You press it until you can't press it anymore, and then you have a locking nut that will lock the hose in. That's because they're tapered and they have a lip on them, so when you use the locking nut to tighten up, it tightens up around the hose and prevents it from leaking and sucking in air. Very simple. Easy design. But what hobbyists are doing when they don't have locking nuts, and we'll take this motor for example, like here's the motor that has the locking nut right here. So when you put on this and go all the way down, you move the locking nut up and the locking nut will lock the hose in so it doesn't leak. That puts pressure, of course, on the plastic components, but that is a good design. So it won't leak. But what if you have something like this? And this is what happens when people connect up their hoses to their canister, or especially the inlet and outlet of canister filters. I see this all the time. They take the hose, they put it on like this, that's it. You're looking for a world of hurt when you do this on a motor or you do this on your inlet and outlet. You see it all the time. Watch the videos. They'll put their hose on like this and say, oh, that's good enough. No. Look how easy this hose comes off. It's out of shape. This is what happens. Eventually, especially if you use glass, these lily pipes made out of glass, and they put the hose on, and you'll see it all the time. And I guess cosmetically, they don't want to put clamps on it. Don't do that. Whenever you put a hose on anything, no matter what it is, always use clamps to tighten that hose up. You're just going to ask for trouble. One day, I know there's people out there, well, I've done it and it's never happened to me. Well, guess what? It's happened to me. It's happened to a lot of people. You got the hose connected up to your, let's say, your lily pipe, and you go to move it and the hose pops off, you got water all over your floor. So what is cheaper? Cleaning up your floor, your carpeting, the back of your wall with water, doing that, or buying a 59-cent stainless steel clamp. This is a package from F-Zone, for example, and they give you clamps and extra O-rings with this. The reason they give you clamps is so you can clamp the hosing so it doesn't leak. You see it all the time. If you see here how the hosing is connected to this filter, look at all the clamps I'm using. This will prevent air from being sucked in. This is also going to prevent any of those hoses from popping off when you go to move this canister filter. I see it all the time. Look at the YouTube videos and you'll see exactly what I say. Eventually, it's going to catch up with you. These hoses stretch out, they open up, and they stay that way. They get hardened from water going through them, and eventually they're going to either suck in air and put it into your canister filter, or they're going to come off and you're going to have water all over the place. Don't do it. Put a clamp on it. Spend the 50 cents. Go get some clamps. There's all kinds of different clamps to clamp down different for your hoses that will fit. Some of them you just squeeze together. Some of them you just use a screwdriver. You don't have to make them real tight. All you're trying to do is make it, hold it on, squeeze it together enough so it doesn't pop off or doesn't start sucking air into it. Now, as I talked to the last one, a lot of people, how do I get air into my canister filter? A lot of people are complaining about that. Well, we talked about that in the first video, that O-rings are a big cause of that. They are not being compressed the way they should be. And because of that, because they're making more of a ring fit in there instead of a real tight press fit, they're eventually going to leak. So when the canister is brand new, it may not leak. And you'll say, oh, it doesn't leak. But after taking it on and off a few times, all of a sudden it starts leaking, and people then start using petroleum jelly Vaseline to put around the gasket. Well, you need a new gasket. So, the petroleum jelly is just going to be a Band-Aid until you get a brand new gasket, because the gasket now is worn out. That's why they do it. So you have to buy it. If they make it a proprietary component, you'll have to buy the gasket from them at any price they ask, or your canister filter leaks. So put clamps on everything to prevent air. Air comes in through bad gaskets. Air comes in through not connecting your hoses up. You just do this. It can suck in air, because don't forget, canister filters are under pressure. And there used to be canister filters, they're still made, where they actually have a pressure gauge to let you know when it's getting clogged up. Well, they're under pressure. And as they start to clog up, that pressure becomes more and more. It doesn't matter whether you have a pre-filter on them. It doesn't matter whether you use a sponge filter on the intake. As that becomes clogged up, excuse me, as that becomes clogged up, the canister filter starts making more and more pressure. That's where you start getting micro bubbles coming in there. Another thing is that people don't think about, why is my canister filling up? It could be your canister filter is running just fine, but it's your aquarium. Are you using CO2? Are your plants photosynthesizing? Well, if your plants are photosynthesizing, you're using CO2. You ever hear the expression that the water looks like 7-Up because the CO2 is being trapped? Don't forget, your canister filter is sucking up all that bubbles into it. If it's your tank is creating oxygen, it's sucking in all those bubbles, those micro bubbles. They got to be expelled some way out of this canister filter. Then it blows the bubbles out, and people are saying, what's happening? Sometimes the intake is too close to plants, it'll suck in air from the plants. Too close to a bubbler, you've got to make sure that the intake is away from bubblers. And if you're using CO2 and you have micro bubbles, it's going to collect those micro bubbles, and it's got to expel those bubbles out somehow. So those are all the leaks that can wind up happening because you're not using clamps, or the manufacturer has not designed your canister filters correctly. So these are simple things to solve by, if you're using CO2, you have to move your intake, put it in a corner or something away from all the micro bubbles, or as far away from your CO2 as you possibly can. Put it away from air pumps so it doesn't suck in any air. If you have any pumps that are pumping using a Venturin and sending all kinds of air into your aquarium, be careful with that. Canister filters can suck up that air, and then cavitation can wind up having if the pump wasn't designed 100% right, or it won't be able to even expel the air that's getting into the canister. And you're going to notice that the canister is going to be run slower and slower because it becomes what is called airlocked. And this happens, and you'll have to take the canister and actually shake it up so the impeller can get it and suck it up and blow it out. And that's very common where people take their canister and have to shake them because it's getting airlocked. It's not pumping as much as they can. So anyhow, that's basically what you have to watch out for with canister filters is how they suck in air. CO2, your plants are photosynthesizing, you're using Venturas, anything where it can suck in air, plus any of your O-rings that aren't using compression fittings or where the O-rings like this are not being compressed down like this is, then you're going to run into problems of sucking in air. It's the nature of the beast. I know some people are thinking, well, why do they design it that way? Because it's cheap. It's inexpensive. And when you have the square ones and they have the O-rings and you have the clamps and you say, oh, this feels nice and tight, you're only dependent on that O-ring to give you the resistance. Not like something like this ADA where there's springs in here literally pulling it down. Like screwing a lid on, you are making that pressure fitting, but you will also see, and which is what, 18 millimeter, 19 millimeter fitting. And then you'll come up here and you'll see this 12 millimeter fitting. Why are you doing that? Doesn't make sense. I'll explain that to you when I talk about impellers and motors. There's a reason why. Like this particular pump here, I think it pumps out about 250 gallons an hour. But by the time you get resistance on it, you're going to get nowhere near that. You're going to get half of that. Maybe you're lucky if you get 125 of that because of resistance, because of the way the motors have been designed. But I'll get into that. The reason motors are designed that way is because basically cost. These motors like this are the one that's on the F zone, for example. You know, a motor like this is going to cost you $500-600 that's on this canister filter. F zone, the motor that they're using now, it's a $170 motor. Well, that's the price you pay for this whole filter. And you can get everything with this filter for a price of one motor. So they have to cut corners somehow, some way. Manufacturers do. They have to. You can't have a $170 motor charging $170 for a canister filter like this. You can't have that. You're not going to make any money. So somewhere they have to go to the engineer and the electrical engineer and the engineer and say, we need a motor, but we have to keep it cost effective because we're giving the customer tubing and we're giving them this and we're giving them quick disconnects. They may not even have quick disconnects, but we're giving them all the tubing, we're giving them the siphons, we're doing all this. We got to cut costs. So we have a product that only comes out at $170. I will explain that in the third video on this series, which will get into more depth of why they do it, cost, why they just can't do it. Only your best of the best canister filters are going to come with separate motors because then you can upgrade the motor, you can go down with the motor, you can do whatever you want. A lot of the new canister filters today are using DC motors, so they're thinking of today and they're thinking of the future of the hobbyists. You have a DC motor, you can turn it down. You can turn it up when you get that bigger tank if it's too powerful. I'm also going to show you, which is going to get a little more complicated, on the F-zone filter, the older F-zone filters, how they're designed and the design flaw in the older motors. I will show you how to fix that design flaw so the motor does not cavitation, doesn't cause cavitation, where it will freely, if any air gets into the canister, it will freely blow out that air without cavitating, and you'll hear that sand sound like you'll be listening to. Well, that's air bubbles constantly being stirred around in there. And the older style motors of like the F-Zone, they've solved that problem. And I will explain to you how to fix that motor so it doesn't do that. If you are having problems, you may not be having problems with it, so you won't, the video may not be interesting to you. But I will show you how you can fix that motor so you don't have to buy a new motor. Because otherwise, if you want to get a new motor for the F-Zone, that's a $170 motor. That's an expensive motor. They sell cheaper motors, but will they fit the canister? That's all up to you if you want to modify it. Like I said, this motor here, it's a $600 Milwaukee motor. That's a very expensive motor on this canister. You can understand where the price of the canister goes up. So until next time, I will be talking about that. That's going to get a little bit more complicated. You may not even be interested in such a video. Some people will. Some people will just be interested in seeing how manufacturers, why they make impellers the way they do, and how come they don't fix these problems. Okay, that will be in the third video. But right now, take your hoses, just don't put them on. Use clamps on everything. Until next time, this is Dr. Novak. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please subscribe. Until next time, happy fish keeping.